feedback. It's funny. Narcissists work so hard to keep this image up, this perfectly polished, untouchable persona they've crafted over years back. They've invested in it like it's their greatest masterpiece. Every interaction, every compliment, every photo, every achievement, real or exaggerated, gets added to the illusion. And for a while, feedback. They manage to sell it to the world. They walk into a room and make sure everyone sees what they want them to see: confidence, charm, success, model feedback. They're brilliant at it, at controlling the narrative, at making sure no one gets to spot the cracks. But here's the thing, no matter how carefully you polish a mask, feedback, real life always finds a way to smudge it. The first real crack in a narcissist's ego doesn't come from someone yelling them or from a dramatic breakup. No, feedback. What truly destabilizes them, what breaks them, is when someone calmly, unshably sees through the mask and doesn't play along. It's not rage that wounds a narcissist. It's indifference. Feedback. It's steady refusal to buy into their performance. That's the moment the control they've held onto so tightly starts to slip. Feedback. It might come in a meeting where someone challenges their idea without flinching, completely unfazed by their title or presence. Or it might be in a relationship where their partner finally says, feedback. You know what? I'm done trying to impress you. And they mean it. They don't say it to provoke. They say it because they're finished performing. Feedback. That's devastating to someone who's spent years being the director of the emotional theater around them. They're used to managing how people see them. Feedback, when you challenge that, especially in a way that's grounded, honest, and without drama, it destabilizes them. Feedback, because now they don't just deal with the feel of being seen for who they really are. They have to face the reality that someone already has. That moment, feedback, that very first time they're not able to redirect, to charm their way out, to spin a better version of themselves. That's when it starts to fall apart. Feedback. And what makes it worse is how internal that destruction is. See, most people assume breaking a narcissist is about some public humiliation, but that's not quite it. In fact, narcissists often recover from big dramatic moments because they know how to twist the narrative. They know how to play the victim. They're masters at it. Feedback. But when their image erodes from something subtle, something quiet and consistent, they don't know what to do. There's nothing dramatic to latch onto. No obvious enemy to blame. Feedback. It's just them, and the slow realization that they're no longer being believed, that people are starting to talk about them when they leave the room. Feedback, that they're not being admired, they're being tolerated, that the impression they've spent years building isn't landing anymore. Feedback. That's terrifying, whose self-worth is completely built on how they're perceived. And suddenly, feedback, that internal monologue, the one they've kept at bay for so long, starts getting louder, the one that whispers, "Oh, what if you're not as great as you pretend to be?" Feedback. What if they're starting to see the real you? What if you're losing your grip? It's in that moment when their version of themselves starts to collapse. Feedback. And they can't control the perception of others, that their ego takes a hit it doesn't know how to recover from. They might try harder for a while. They might double down. Post more, feedback, charm more, dominate more conversations. But it's desperate now, it's obvious. And that's the part they can't standing feedback. The very effort to hold on is revealing how fragile it all really is. And here's what's truly poetic about it, because sometimes life is poetic. The person who causes this unraveling, feedback, they're not trying to win. They're not trying to destroy. They're just finally living in truth. They're saying, "I see you and I'm not afraid of you." Feedback. But I'm also not staying small to keep your illusion intact. It's not revenge, it's release. That's the moment everything changes. That's the moment the narcissist, for the first time, feedback, feels powerless in the one area they've always relied on: their image. The mask slips and someone else sees the person behind it and walks away without flinching. Feedback. And that is what breaks them. Feedback. If there's one thing a narcissist counts on more than anything, it's the belief that they are always the one in control, especially in relationships, romantic, professional, feedbacked, or even friendships. They operate from this quiet assumption that they hold the power, that the other person needs them more, that they're the prize, that no matter how badly they behave, feedback. The people around them will keep chasing, keep proving, keep bending just a little more. It's not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it shows up in small, subtle ways. The patronizing compliments, feedback, the emotional push-pull, the way they disappear when you need them but expect you to be there the moment they call. And over time, if you're not paying attention, you can start to internalize it. Feedback. You start to believe that you have to earn their approval, their time, their affection, that their validation somehow says something about your worth. That maybe if you try a little harder, feedback, they'll finally see you. But here's what a narcissist never expects. They never expect to be left by someone they thought they had wrapped around their finger. Feedback, that moment when the person they underestimated, belittled, or emotionally manipulated walks away without looking back, is unlike anything else for them. It's not just rejection. Feedback. It's a dismantling of their entire power structure. Because narcissists don't just assume you'll stay, you depend on it. They think feedback of, you need me more than I need you. So when that equation flips even just once, it shakes them in a way they're not prepared for. Feedback. especially when it comes from someone they considered beneath them. That sounds harsh, but it's the truth. Narcissists don't value people equally. They categorize it. Feedback. You're either someone who can elevate their status, someone who poses a threat to their control, or someone who serves a purpose, validation, loyalty, admiration. Feedback. If you fall into that third category, they don't see you as someone who could ever have the strength or clarity to walk away. They see you as predictable, as someone they've trained emotionally. Feedback. To stay when that person, the one they overlooked, underestimated, maybe even laughed at behind closed doors, suddenly stops answering, stops engaging, stops trying. Feedback. It's not just ego damage, it's ego collapse. They can't pute it. They go through all the motions, confusion, anger, disbelief. They'll question your loyalty. Feedback. Accuse you of being ungrateful, maybe even try to guilt you into staying. Feedback. But it's not because they suddenly realized your worth. It's because they're scrambling to re-establish a dynamic they were convinced would never change. Feedback. What really stings is that you've taken back something they thought was theirs, your attention, your energy, your emotional investment, and you've redirected it somewhere they can't reach. Feedback. You're no longer playing the game they set up. You're not sitting at their table waiting for crumbs. And that decision does just threaten their ego. It dismantles it. See, feedback. Narcissists build their confidence not from within, but from dominance over others. If they can control how you feel, they feel powerful. Feedback. If they can get you to doubt yourself while constantly seeking their approval, that's success in their eyes. Feedback. But when you stop engaging in that cycle, when you recognize the game and walk away from it, it's a form of emotional clarity that cuts deeper than any argument ever could. Because now we model feedback. You're not reacting. You're not begging. You're not pleading for them to see you. You're just done. And the worst part for them, they didn't see it coming. Feedback. Narcissists tend to believe that the people they devalue will always need them. That even if things get rocky, they'll eventually come back tail between their legs. Model feedback. So when you walk out with your dignity intact, it shakes their entire sense of superiority. And sure, they might act like they're unaffected. Feedback. They might post something to make it look like they're thriving. They might find someone else quickly, someone new to shower them with praise. But inside, that rejection eats at them. Feedback. Because it wasn't just anyone who walked away. It was the one person they believed never would. Feedback. That's not a small wound for someone who's built their identity on the idea they're always the one holding the cards. That loss of control, of certainty. Feedback. Of dominance, it breaks something inside them, something they've spent their whole life trying to protect. Feedback. And what's truly powerful is that this doesn't require cruelty or revenge or some grand confrontation. Just quiet, grounded resolve. Feedback. Just the decision to no longer small for someone else's comfort. Just the choice to walk away when it's clear they'll never see you for who you are. Feedback. That's the moment they realize they were never as untouchable as they thought. Feedback. One of the most unnerving experiences for a narcissist isn't being challenged. It's not even being exposed. It's being ignored. See, feedback. For someone who builds their entire identity around being seen, am I invalidated? Losing the spotlight isn't just inconvenient. It's existential. Attention is their oxygen. Feedback. It's what keeps their ego inflated, what confirms their self-worth. And when that attention dries up, when the room no longer lights up when they walk in, when people stop hanging on to every word, feedback. When admiration turns into indifference, that's when things start to crack. Because here's the truth, narcissists don't just enjoy attention, they require it. Feedback. They are constantly scanning their environment consciously or unconsciously to make sure they're still the center of someone's universe. They live off reactions. Good or bad, praise, envy, feedback, fear, even anger, it all feeds their sense of importance. As long as people are looking, they feel alive. As long as they're being talked about, they matter. Feedback. But when people stop reacting altogether, that's what they can't handle. It's like a performer stepping out on stage to find an empty theater. No audience, no applause. Feedback. No one waiting to be impressed. Just silence. And that silence is brutal because without a stage, without an audience, they have to confront the one thing they've spent their entire life avoiding, feedback themselves. And that's the last place they ever want to go. What really throws them off is that the shift doesn't usually happen all at once. It starts subtly. Fewer compliments, less engagement. Back. People start listening less, interrupting more, even walking away mid-sentence. At first, the narcissist will try to resort their usual charm, maybe with a bigger story, a louder laugh, feedback, or a perfectly timed humble brag. But when that doesn't land, when it falls flat, they feel something foreign creeping in security. And let me tell you, feedback. Nothing frights a narcissist more than the feeling that they are no longer impressive. They don't know how to exist without admiration. Feedback. So when they're suddenly surrounded by people who aren't giving it to them, it's like emotional withdrawal. You'll see them start to scramble, posting more, boasting more. Feedback, finding new people to impress. But all of it has a different energy, not power. It's panic. They might lash out, accusing others of being ungrateful, jealous, or fake. Feedback. Or they might try to reinvent themselves entirely. New look, new job, new partner. Because they believe that if they can just find the right external fix, they'll get that attention back. Feedback. But the truth is, what they're really trying to recover isn't just admiration, it's control. Because being the center of attention isn't just about being liked. It's about being noticed, feedback, being irrelevant, being in charge of how others feel and respond. And once people stop giving them that, once they stop dancing to that rhythm, the narcissist is left exposed. Feedback. No longer the main character in everyone else's story, they have to face the fact that the world moves on without them. That people grow tired, that admiration fades. Feedback. That someone else will always come along who's more captivating, more grounded, more genuinely magnetic, because their worth isn't built on external applause. Feedback. The hardest pill for a narcissist to swallow is realizing they're not indispensable. That's the core injury. That's what hurts. Not just being ignored. Feedback. But realizing that the spotlight they assumed was permanent, well, actually theirs, people tolerate it, maybe even admired it for a while. Feedback. But once they've seen behind the curtain, once they recognize the manipulation, the needness behind the charm, they begin to disengage. And that quiet disengagement. Feedback. That's more damaging to a narcissist than any confrontation, because when you confront them, you're still giving them energy, you're still playing. But when you disengage, feedback. When you stop responding altogether, you remove the very thing that fuels them. You rob them of their favorite drug, attention. And what most powerful about this is that you don't need to yell, feedback, or make a scene, or get revenge. You just need to stop participating. The minute you stop orbiting them, they realize they were never the sun. They just need you to believe they were. Feedback. That moment when they walk into a room and no one turns their head, when they speak and no one seems to care, when they realize the spotlight has moved on, that's when it hits. Feedback. That's when their ego takes a hit it wasn't ready for. Because it's not just that they're not being admired, it's that they're being ignored, that they've become background noise. Feedback. And for someone who's spent their whole life trying to be unforgettable, that might just be the thing they never recover from. Feedback. There's this moment that narcissists dread more than almost anything. And it's not being disliked or even being rejected. It's being held accountable. Truly feedback. Genuinely held to account in a way they can't escape, can't twist, can't manipulate. Because narcissists are expert deflectors. They're used to dodging responsibility like it's a reflex back. Something goes wrong. It's someone else's fault. Someone gets hurt. That person's too sensitive. The relationship falls apart while they were the one carrying the whole thing anyway. Feedback. This isn't just a habit. It's a survival mechanism, because taking responsibility would mean looking inward. And that's dangerous territory for a narcissist. Feedback. It would mean admitting imperfection. It would mean acknowledging damage they've caused. And once that door is cracked open, everything they've built, the image, feedback, the illusion of superiority, starts to fall apart. But life has a way of catching up with people. You can deflect for a while. You can spin narratives, gaslight, play the victim. Feedback. You can keep stacking stories on top of stories to protect yourself from truth. But then something happens that you can't explain away. Something undeniable. Someone finally says, no, a boundary is enforced, a consequence lands, and there's no one left to blame. Feedback. That's the moment a narcissist feels their ego shatter, not because they've been embarrassed, not because someone raised their voice, but because reality caught up and there's no exit. Feedback. Maybe it's a job loss they didn't see coming, not because of office politics, because people finally spoke up. Maybe it's a partner who lays it all out calmly, clearly back, and doesn't take the bait when the narcissist tries to turn the tables. Maybe it's a child who grows up and refuses to carry the emotional burden anymore. Whatever the situation is, back, it hits different when the feedback is measured fair and firm, when it's not an attack, just the truth, because that's what they can't fight. Narcissists rely on emotional chaos to win. Feedback. They can provoke you. They can shift the focus. If they can make you raise your voice, they can paint you as irrational. But when someone holds up a mirror with quiet conviction and simply says, feedback, this is what you did, and this is how it affected me, there's nowhere to run, no performance to hide behind, just the weight of their own actions staring back at them. Feedback. And what makes this so devastating for them is that it doesn't give them a villain to fight. They're left facing the one person they've tried to avoid all along themselves. Feedback. That's where the internal panic begins, because narcissists have curated their identity around the belief that they are above reproach. Feedback. They're not just good at convincing others of this, they've convinced of themselves. So when accountability is laid bare, when evidence is clear and patterns are undeniable, feedback, it doesn't just feel like someone is disagreeing with them. It feels like their reality is being ripped apart. That's where you'll start to see the cracks in the armor. Feedback. Sometimes it looks like denial, complete and immediate. That's not true. You're misremembering. You're exaggerating. Other times it looks like an emotional meltdown. Feedback. A last-ditch attempt to gain control of the narrative through pity or guilt. But beneath all of it, there's this rising fear. What if I'm not who I say I am? What if they're right? Now, feedback. They might never say that out loud. In fact, most won't. But the internal struggle is real and it runs deep. Accountability, especially when it's delivered calmly and without malice. Feedback strips away the narcissist's usual weapons. They can't gaslight someone who's already done the work to see clearly. Feedback. They can't manipulate someone who isn't emotionally invested in proving them wrong anymore. And they can't escape the feeling that for the first time, they've been truly deeply seen. Feedback. That kind of exposure is unbearable to someone whose entire existence depends on control. Accountability robs them of that. It doesn't offer them a stage, it offers them a mirror. Feedback. And the mirror doesn't flatter, it reveals. The irony is this kind of moment could be an opportunity, a moment of real growth if they chose to take it. But narcissism by nature resists change because change would require admission of fault, and admission would require vulnerability. Feedback. And vulnerability feels like death to someone who's built their identity on invulnerability. So instead, many retreat. They'll double down, rewrite the story. Feedback. Find someone new who hasn't seen behind the mask yet. But no matter where they run, that seed of truth has been planted. And that's the thing about truth. It doesn't go away. Feedback. Even if it's denied, suppressed, buried under new distractions, it lingers. It waits. And whether they acknowledge it or not, it's changed something. Feedback. Because once they've been held accountable in a way they couldn't escape, once the illusion of infallibility has been pierced, they're never quite as untouchable again. Feedback. There's a moment that truly disrupts a narcissist's sense of power, and it's one they never see coming. Feedback. It's when the person they thought they had completely figured out, someone they pegged as dependent, eager to please, maybe even a little lost, suddenly evolves, not with fanfare. Feedback, not to get their attention, but quietly, steadily, and most importantly, without them. Narcissists thrive on emotional stagnation. Feedback. They count on people staying exactly where they left them, still seeking approval, still craving validation, still waiting for the next breadcrumb of attention. Feedback. Because as long as someone stays in that space, the narcissist gets to stay in control. They get to be the one who determines what's valuable, who's worthy. Feedback. And when you're allowed to feel good about yourself, but the moment you start to grow in a direction that doesn't involve them, that's when things shift. Feedback. That's when their grip starts to slip. And it doesn't have to be dramatic. You don't need to move countries or launch a business or find some dazzling new partner. Feedback. Sometimes it's as simple as changing the way you respond. You stop needing their validation. You're explaining yourself. You stop performing for their approval. Feedback. You begin making choices from a place of self-respect, not fear. And that subtle shift, that terrifies them because now they're not the source of your strength anymore. You are feedback. And here's the thing, narcissists don't know what to do with someone who no longer needs them, not just emotionally, but psychologically, because that means they no longer have leverage. Feedback. If they control how you feel, they can't control you. And when you've outgrown their version of you, the version they could manipulate, diminish, feedback, and reel back in when it was convenient, they feel irrelevant. Not because you've said anything cruel or even done anything vengeful. Feedback, but because your growth stands as undeniable proof that their narrative about you was wrong. That's a powerful moment for you and for them. Feedback, because it's the first time they have to contend with the possibility that they weren't as powerful they believed. You're becoming stronger, happier, more grounded. Feedback. And more self-assured without them forces them to look at the truth, the dynamic they spent so long trying to shape. And that truth stings, you see. Feedback. And narcissists like to keep people emotionally small, not always through overt cruelty. Sometimes it's through subtle dismissiveness, backhanded compliments. Feedback. Little comments that chip away at your confidence just enough to keep you second-guessing yourself. Are you sure you can handle that? You're not really the type to do that. Feedback. Are you? That's a bit much, don't you think? And when someone finally rejects that story, not by arguing, but by outgrowing it, it's like the walls start to collapse around them. Feedback. Because if you could change, maybe they were wrong. If you could evolve, maybe you were never as weak as they made you out to be. Maybe you were never under their thumb the way they thought. Feedback. And once that realization creeps in, it's not just a blow to the ego, it's a full-on identity crisis. They might try to claw their way back into relevance. Feedback. You'll see attempts to re-engage, suddenly being supportive, overly complimentary, just checking in. But it's not about you. It's about control. They're not interested in your growth. Feedback. They're threatened by it. They want to know if they still have access, if the door is still open, if underneath it all, you still see them as the person who defines your worth. Feedback. But when you've really grown, when you've done the work, healed the wounds, reclaimed your voice, those old dynamics don't appeal anymore. They feel small, heavy, misaligned. Feedback. You see through them, and more importantly, you no longer feel compelled to return to them. And that's the quiet devastation a narcissist never expects. You don't fight them. Feedback. You don't chase them. You don't even need to explain yourself. You just keep going. That's what breaks them. Not your anger, not your confrontation, but your evolution. Feedback. The simple fact that you no longer fit inside the box they built for you. You've expanded, and they can't reach you anymore. Feedback. Because when a narcissist realizes the person they once dismissed or controlled is now thriving in their absence, that's not just an ego bruise. Feedback. That's a collapse of the illusion they've depended on. And they're left standing there, watching as the person they underestimated becomes someone they can't influence, can't predict. Model feedback, and can no longer diminish. That's the moment they understand. They didn't lose you because you changed. They lost you because you finally saw who you really are. Feedback. There's something that deeply unsettles a narcissist, more than criticism, more than being ignored, more than even being held accountable. It's when you stop being emotionally predictable. Feedback, when the responses they've relied on, the guilt, the appeasement, the fear, the confusion, stop showing up the way they used to. Suddenly, they don't know which button to press. Feedback, because none of them are working. And that unpredictability, that emotional detachment breaks the foundation they've built everything on: control. Because for a narcissist, feedback, it's never just about affection or admiration. It's about control of the environment, control of the narrative, and especially control over your emotional state. Feedback. If they can make you feel small, they stay big. If they can make you question yourself, they stay in charge of the truth. If they can provoke a reaction, they know they still have access to you. Even a negative response confirms their influence. But when you begin to detach, when you stop reacting the way you used to, it unravels everything. You say less, you stop defending yourself, you stop trying to prove your worth, you stop playing the emotional tug of war. And to them, it feels like they're yelling into a void. That's terrifying. Feedback, not because they're missing your affection, but because they're losing their leverage. This kind of emotional shift doesn't always come with loud declarations. In fact, it's usually quiet feedback. It happens after the last exhausting argument, or the final round of gaslighting, or the 100th time you realize you've compromised your peace just to avoid another emotional storm. Feedback. You begin to feel the weight of always trying to fix what someone else keeps breaking. And one day you just stop. You don't stop caring. You stop trying to convince. You stop making excuses. Feedback. You stop waiting for them to change. And this change in you, it throws them completely off balance. Because it's not defiance, it's not rebellion, it's something much more powerful. Feedback. Indifference. Indifference is a language narcissists don't speak. They understand love, they understand hatred, they even understand fear. But indifference, that's silence, that's stillness. Feedback, that's you stepping out of their emotional game completely. And if there's one thing they can't handle, it's no longer being able to provoke a reaction. You see, they expect you to fall apart. They expect you to chase clarity, to beg for honesty, to explode with frustration. Feedback. They've trained themselves to read your emotional cues and use them to stay one step ahead. But when those cues are gone, when you've gone internal, reflective, grounded, they lose the map. Feedback. Without the map, they have no strategy. That's when panic sets in. They may ramp things up, try to bait you, push harder, suddenly act overly sweet, even apologetic. Feedback. But when you've truly detached, it's not about waiting for them to change. It's about recognizing that their behavior doesn't dictate your peace anymore. You're not being cold. Feedback. You're being clear. That emotional distance doesn't make you cruel. It makes you free. And freedom is the last thing a narcissist wants for you. Feedback, because it means they've lost the ability to define your experience. It means you're no longer caught in the cycle of highs and lows, of praise and punishment. Feedback, of being valued only when you serve their narrative. When you reach that level of emotional maturity, when you can calmly observe instead of react, when you can walk away without needing closure. Feedback, when you can sit in silence without needing to prove your side of the story. It sends a clear message they no longer own a part of you. And that's the part that breaks them. Because the truth is, feedback, narcissists believe they are unforgettable, irreplaceable. They believe that no one will ever detach from them without regret. But when you walk away, not in anger, not in pain, feedback, but in peace, they realize they were wrong. Not only did you detach, you thrived. Not only did you stop reacting, you stopped needing them entirely. And here's the final blow. Feedback. Your emotional detachment becomes a mirror, one they didn't ask for, but one they can't avoid. Feedback. It reflects the truth they've worked so hard to suppress, that they never had the power they thought they did. Because real power isn't about control, it's about connection. Feedback. It's about trust, respect, mutual understanding. And they never truly had that. They only had your willingness to keep trying. When that willingness disappears, they're left alone with the truth. Feedback. And that's when the ego truly breaks, not with a bang, but with silence. Your peace, your refusal to play a role in a story that never served you. Feedback. That's when they realize they didn't lose control of you. They never really had it.